de l'ALENA
And
dans ce
live now to
contexte.
Ottawa, we listen to former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney.
Monsieur Trump, il faut en prendre puis en laisser. Et moi, je suis d'avis que les positions du Canada sur
Canada's
les
position
3 ou
on
4 points
the 3 or 4
en
items
suspens,
that are
les
now in
positions du
discussion,
Canada ne sont pas
Canada's
déraisonnables.
position are not
C'est des
unreasonable.
compromis raisonnables.
Those are
Et j'ai
reasonable
l'impression que dans
compromises. I have the impression that in
des
the
États-Unis
interest of the
et du
United States
Canada,
and of
il y a
Canada,
toutes les raisons au monde de vouloir
there's every reason in the world for us to find a deal very shortly.
je
So
demeure confiant.
I remain confident that, and I have always been, but I remain confident that
Le gouvernement Trudeau va
the
réussir
Trudeau government will be able to
justement la conclusion
conclude
de cette négociation.
these negotiations that are sometimes
Décembre
difficult.
2016, vous aviez dit
In
que
December
Monsieur Trump
2016, you
était
said
un
that
gentleman
Mr.
parfait.
Trump was a
Parfait gentleman.
perfect gentleman.
Est-ce que
Those
c'est
were the
toujours
words you
votre
used.
opinion?
Is that still your opinion? Well, listen, you've mentioned that I didn't know him intimately. I knew him as a friend in New York and in Palm Beach. Socially, I would know him. Never had a deal, a commercial deal with him. And in those circumstances, he was a gentleman in all times. I was seeing him often with my wife, my children. And it was his behavior was really impressive. We had nothing to say against him in that way. Now, he's the president. He runs a country. It's different.
Qu'est-ce que vous pensez de sa présidence?
What do you think about his presidency? No, I have no comments on this because Mr. Trudeau is called to deal with him. And I want to help Mr. Trudeau and not go against him.
Do you think the government has to give up on supply management?
Laura.
There's a mic. Sorry.
Glenn McGregor, CTV News. I'll let Laura ask her question. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah,
sorry
sure.
about that.
Yeah.
I didn't even know. What do you think the government has to do in terms of supply management and opening up the dairy sector in the negotiations?
Well, you know, they've already opened it up in the TPP and in the European negotiations by certain percentage points. So it's not as if this is a sacrosanct situation that is not susceptible to compromise. It's already on the table. And I would be very surprised if Canada could achieve a negotiated, successful free trade agreement with the United States without some showing flexibility on some areas of supply management. Now, let me be pretty clear. I never thought that this meant getting rid of supply management. I always thought that they should be more flexible than they were. And my guess is that that's the way it's going to turn out.
Mr. Mulroney, you spoke very favorably of George H. Bush today, in contrast to current leadership, which we presume to mean President Trump.
I didn't mean that.
Oh, okay. Well, I wonder if you could expand a little
That was an
on
abstract concept.
Okay. Could you expand a little on that and how, following my colleague's question about someone you described as a perfect gentleman, how your opinion of him has changed and exactly why?
Well, look, George Herbert Walker Bush was and is, he's going on 95. I'm going to see him on the 28th down in Kennebunkport. I'm going down to spend some time with him. This is a marvelous guy, great friend of Canada's, brilliant leader of the United States, and a very easy guy to get along with. That was then and now is now. And now we have President Trump, who is, how shall I say, unorthodox in some of his approaches. And, but he was elected by the people of the United States of America. And I learned a long time ago that even if I disagree with an individual, if he was elected by the people, you have to deal with them, and you only deal with people in respect. Otherwise, you don't achieve anything. So I set aside any personal views, if I were the Prime Minister, which I, of course, am not. But Mr. Trudeau has set aside any personal views that he may have on specific activities going on in Washington in the greater interests of achieving a national consensus that the Americans, Canadians can sign on to. So, look, it's very easy to get into a shouting contest with somebody, but it's very unprofitable. In the end, you know, you need everybody on side.
Just to follow up on a different topic, Doug Ford's use of the notwithstanding clause on this bill. I understand you have a personal conflict here. Your daughter is the Attorney General of the province and presumably was consulted on this. But I mean, are you concerned in general about premiers now using this for something that seems like a comparatively minor situation?
Well, you know, you could make a case that when it was used in Saskatchewan and the Yukon and other places, that it was for relatively peripheral issues. It's there. It's a constitutional provision. It was agreed to by Mr. Trudeau. It's part of his package, and it's been used a number of times. There's lots of precedent for it. It was used in Quebec in 1988. And I would point out that it wasn't, I've read something that it was the separatist government in Quebec that invoked the notwithstanding clause on Bill 178. That's wrong. It was the Liberal government of Robert Bourassa, supported by Claude Ryan, who invoked the notwithstanding clause. So I think we have to be aware of those things and careful in our condemnations. If this weren't if this thing was evil, Mr. Trudeau would not have put it in his constitutional package. He put it in there because he was convinced it was good. And so if it's part of the package, it's not anti-democratic to use it, to invoke it if you're the elected premier of a given province. I gave you my view earlier on what I've always thought about the notwithstanding clause. There's no secret in that. I've always felt, you know, that it's, you know, to have, for me, the backbone of our democracy, the strength of our democracy, is the independence and competence of the court system in Canada. We have one that will rival any in the world. And I've always felt that once the Supreme Court of Canada made a decision that strengthened Canada and strengthened our unity, and that I was personally, I had difficulty with anybody invoking a provision that could override the Supreme Court of Canada. And that's why I opposed it then, and that's why I oppose it today. To say nothing of the fact that it was part of a package which Quebec didn't sign on to, which is no small matter. And the fact that it contained a notwithstanding clause didn't make it any more attractive to me. But in fairness, it was the Western premiers who made it clear to Mr. Trudeau that there would be no constitutional amendment without a safety valve, and they came up with the notwithstanding clause.
Bonjour, Mylène Crête de la presse canadienne. Qu'est-ce que vous répondez
What do you
aux
answer
producteurs de lait qui
to
vous
the
accusent de
milk
nuire aux
producers who are
négociations de l'ALENA à cause de votre
accusing you
position sur la
to
gestion de l'offre?
go against or the supply management negotiations? Well, no, it's a nonsense. For years, the federal negotiators have made some concessions on supply management with Europe, with the TPP. What I'm suggesting is that they keep an open mind. Well, you see Mr. Trump on TV. Mr. Trump is now saying
Canada has a 300% tariff on Wisconsin milk, and there's going to be no deal without a deal on Wisconsin milk. That accounts for 0.1% of our dairy trade, to say nothing of the entire trade, which is about US dollars, about $700 billion a year. So what are you going to do? Are you going to compromise and resolve this matter? Because you are not going to get a deal of any kind without a compromise that allows Mr. Trump a victory. And for him, a victory is measured, I think, in dealing with, as he calls my farmers, a victory of some kind for his farmers. So, alors, c'est pas... Moi, je pense que...
So I think that...
Madame, je comprends bien les cultures.
I understand the farmers.
Je sais pas de démolir...
I'm not trying to destroy supply management. But let's have a bit more flexibility that will enable Mr. Trudeau and Madame Freeland to negotiate a deal that will cover everything.
Pourquoi offrir cette
So
flexibilité?
why offering
que
this
les Américains ont
flexibility
déjà
that the
rejetée
Americans have already
en se retirant du
rejected by
partenariat
walking
transpacifique?
away from the Trans-Pacific deal? It has no importance. That's their problem. They are keeping themselves from an amazing market. Now, we're still there, and that's good. But if that's their position, well, my mom kept saying,
never cut off your nose to spite your face.
and that's what Americans are doing right now
Avec le TPP.
with the TPP.
Tough luck.
Ils ont refusé cette flexibilité.
Well, they refuse that flexibility.
Oui.
Pourquoi est-ce qu'on l'a pas?
So why are we
On
coming
verra.
back
Moi,
to
je pense
this?
que ça va se
Well,
régler.
listen to me.
Yes.
Good
It will be
afternoon, Katie
settled.
Simpson, CBC News.
How's Washington?
Well, cooler than here,
Yeah.
or warmer than here. My question to you is, some people who are following the talks very closely and are very informed on the nuance of Canada-U.S. trade, people like Derek Burney, are saying that at the end of the day, a NAFTA is going to come down to the mood of the president, whether you catch him in a good mood or a bad mood. Do you agree with that assessment, that this is all about temperament from the White House?
Well, Derek's very rarely wrong on anything. But I'm not there. If you're not in the room with the negotiators, it's hard to understand what the body language is and where the emphasis has to be placed and so on. There's no doubt that Bob Lighthizer is dealing with a special situation down there. And the American side are on a pretty short leash because of President Trump's arguments. I just mentioned the indication of Wisconsin, the Wisconsin dairy products. You'd have to be foolish not to understand that there's not going to be a deal, period, unless there's a compromise in that area, because that's what he campaigned on, and it's stuck to him, and he's stuck with it. So if we don't find a way to accommodate some of that, then we're not going to have a deal.